All right. So you get a hot under the collar. That's what In 1978, I was a newly ordained priest who had really felt a calling to be an inner city priest, and finally got my wish to work at St. Anne's in the South Bronx. And I was working with somebody who is one of the best our tradition has ever lifted up as an inner city priest, both on the East Coast and on the West Coast. And early on, he sat me down and he said, "Who lives in this neighborhood?" I said, "Well, African Americans, West Indians, and Hispanics." He said, what do you know about the first two groups? We talked about that. And he said, okay, now let's focus on Latinos. He said, "Where are the Latinos from in this neighborhood?" And I said, "Puerto Rico." He said, "Anybody here from Argentina? Anybody here from Costa Rica or Cuba or Peru?" No. He said, "Then focus and concentrate, specialize, and get to know the people who are in your neighborhood. What food do they eat? What's their music? What's special about the way they speak Spanish? What's their history? What's their culture?" It's a focus. I did. And I worked with Puerto Ricans both in the United States and before coming here. Patty and I started a retreat center, a new congregation. So, who is your neighbor focus? We come to Baltimore in 2012. I start talking to Latinos, and I said, "Is there a Puerto Rican neighborhood?" "No." "Where are people from? Where are you from?" And so people started introducing themselves. They're from the three northern countries of Central America: El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico. So, time, new chapter, new focus. And part of new focus was the possibility of not only learning of life and needs of folks here in Baltimore, but also what's life like in the country of origin. That's the primary reason I participated in this pilgrimage. It is with the hope that perhaps what I would learn and share would inspire more people at the Cathedral and Baltimore to get to know and work with the immigrant community. You might remember we, on Inauguration Day of this year, 20 January, the Cathedral hosted a presentation about immigrants. And we were amazed that we thought there might be 30 and there were 125. So, interest. The other piece is, of what led me to this pilgrimage is the sponsoring organization, which is Cristo Sal. Cristo Sal was founded 20 years ago to support victims of human rights abuse in El Salvador and then Honduras and Guatemala. It was started by the Episcopal Church in El Salvador. It is without question considered the best organization doing that work in those countries. The executive director of Cristo Sal is quoted in the New York Times. Noah Bullock. Have you seen that name? Or Cristo Sal? They're cited in the public media of what's going on in El Salvador right now. So they advertised that there was going to be a pilgrimage around the life of Oscar Romero, and I signed up. Salvadorian history. You have the very early history on the page 2 of the handout. I'm not going to do all of that, but let's jump to 1850. El Salvador is now an independent country, and it has just made a major change in what its cash crop, which is going to be the whole foundation of its economy. It goes from indigo, that dye that produced this beautiful purple, to coffee. Soon after making that decision, the 14 families that run El Salvador also made decisions that they were going to take over the 1/3 of the land of the country that was commonly owned, particularly by Indians. It was where they did subsistence farming. That was taken away. The poor were forced to be indentured servants working at these coffee plantations, often homeless. And the other decision that was made was that 60 or 70% of the GNP of El Salvador was going to go to military and police. This is vastly different from the decisions that Costa Rica made. And you see a huge difference in these two Central American countries where they invested in public education, in health care, basic needs of citizens. I think eventually got rid of a standing army. That's another thing. 70 years after these decisions made, things are so terrible that the people rise up in protest. The military came in and slaughtered 30,000 people. That was 2% of the country's population in 2 days. I went to that place. It wasn't until 2011 that the government agreed to allow a plaque to be erected to commemorate that slaughter. It's called La Matanza. Okay, that's 1830. Following 1830 is 50 continuous years of military authoritarian rule. That is the longest continuous rule by military of any country in Latin America. Now ponder that one. Of all the countries you know in Latin America, in their history, El Salvador has the longest. From this period, things once again, Indian culture smashed, gone. It just gets more and more grim until in 1980, once again, the people rise up in protest against abject poverty. And the massacres begin again. And I went to another place. I went to a place where one of the early massacres happened in the Civil War. So 1,000 people were killed in this village. And the military had, this is now one of the killing squads of the government, came in, separated the men, the boys, the women, and the children, and killed them in that order. And all of the names of those 1,000 people were on a semicircular plaque. I had never seen before names where the age following was 0. Babies. So, during that 12-year civil war in El Salvador, 75,000 people were killed, and perhaps equally important for us, 1 million people. That is 1 in every 5 people in that country left became immigrants. 1 million people. Okay, big shift. In the early 1960s, you might remember Vatican II makes some big changes or suggests some big changes in the way the church functions and cares for the people. And one of their mandates was that the people should read the Bible. What a radical notion. Come together, read the Bible, and then apply its teaching to your everyday life. This became a source of hope. And I can't tell you how many people I met in El Salvador who emphasized it was teachings from the Bible. Not Marxism, not socialism. It was Bible teaching that gave people hope, that brought them together. Comunidades de base, which are just basically faith-based communities, coming together. We visited one. It provided some economic cooperation, cottage industries, libraries. There were only a handful in the whole country of public libraries. Some of these base communities would develop libraries for people to read. And so one of the people, a Salvadorian, says that from people's exposure and reading the Bible, it really became good news for them. It was the news that provided a sense of hope, and that it really showed the power that is in the message, the power of resurrection. That death is not the last answer. Death is what leads into new life and resurrection. And as faith grows, as more and more lay people are trained as catechists, teaching, bringing together and teaching Bible, hope grows in El Salvador. And then let's talk about Romero. I'm sure it was no accident that the way this pilgrimage began was at the place where he was killed. And immediately it reminded me that this is the way, at least my understanding, this is the way the gospel was put together. That it was the death and resurrection of Jesus that finally is what really transforms the apostles, the disciples, so that they say, I'm following you no matter what. And from death and resurrection, they go back and look at Jesus' life, his actions and his teachings in a new way. And the very last thing that is added is his birth. So it's reverse chronology, and it was the same thing there on this pilgrimage, that ahead of one of the killing squads, while he's celebrating communion, kills him. First time a bishop celebrating communion was killed since Becket in 1170. Romero was from a small town, poor, raised among poor people, but early on showed great academic promise, a person of real faith, even as an early teenager. So he's educated in the Roman Catholic Church, including sent off to Rome. That's where he gets his theology degree. He is asked to stay and get a doctorate, and he says, no, I need to go home. I'm not a scholar. But when he comes home with that education, he's made the head of seminaries, he's a high administrator for the archdiocese, and he does that for 30 years. And then he gets elected bishop of a small, rural, poor diocese. And Romero immediately starts going out and meeting the people, praying with them, leading Bible study. What do you need? Just the kind of stuff that you would hope and expect from any kind of pastor, right? Romero is that. He is no prince. He is a pastor. And then, maybe some of you, this is the debatable, how it happened. 3 years after this position in a rural diocese, Romero gets selected to be the Archbishop of San Salvador. there was mixed opinion among the other bishops in that country, because he was someone who saw himself as being a pastor to all the people. Remember, 14 families run this place. They run the military, they make all the decisions. But Romero says, I'm here to serve them, I'm here to serve the other 90% of the population. I am a pastor for all people. Not 2 weeks after being made the Archbishop of San Salvador, his best friend, a priest, is murdered. Now, there had been any number of priests and nuns who had been murdered, as well as lay leaders. But when his best friend is murdered, he realizes anybody can be murdered in this country, including me. And he becomes more and more clear on what is the call of the gospel for the people. Every week, he offered a 1.5-hour sermon on the radio. Virtually the whole country listened. Why? After doing the Bible study, part 1, after applying the Bible teachings to everyday life, part 2, part 3 would be, and here's what happened last week. Those 25 people that disappeared in that little village, well, they were killed, and here are their names. It was the only way that people in the country got news. And so you can imagine the tension between Romero and the military government is just growing and growing. The president of the country one day in a national interview asked him, why do you foment confrontation between the government and the people? He said, the government does not serve the people in this country. And he said the church always must be on the side of the people. So what happens to them may happen to me. Became very aware of the possibility that he was going to get shot. And you have some of his writings just beforehand. And then he was killed. And it opened the floodgates. Killing squads all over the place. I told you I went to one village where 1,000. There were several of those kind of massacres. 75,000 people were killed in that civil war. And as I mentioned, 1 million left to come here. The last day of the actual pilgrimage in San Salvador was a huge march commemorating the day of his assassination, which was 45 years before. So 24 of March. And let me throw in, so he's a saint, but he was made a saint in the Episcopal Church earlier, almost 9 years earlier. We were the first church in the world to identify him, proclaim him as a saint. But, so this is 100,000 perhaps people marching through the streets of San Salvador, commemorating his assassination. And because there were so many people, the people felt safe enough to also raise up a protest about one thing, which was the government is considering resuming gold mining. Gold mining just pollutes the water. They stopped only a year ago from gold mining because they had almost no potable drinking water left. And now, because they can't use cryptocurrency to pay off their debts, they're going to resume gold mining. So that was all. And that long march, 5-6 hour march, winding through the streets of San Salvador, ends at the National Cathedral. And I went downstairs to the crypt. which is where he's buried. Just a second. I'm going to start coughing. There's a sculpture, a bronze sculpture, over his place of burial that begins with his head. It's very clear. It's him. You can identify it, mitre, the glasses, etc. And this realistic presentation continues from the shoulders down to the heart, which is where he was shot and killed. And there is a precious red jewel about the size of an egg. And the piety of the people is to come to that crypt and kneel and touch that spot and remember where he was killed. From the chest, it flows into like a sheet, and it's flat to the end. But this figure is lying on a bed with 4 posts. And I want to ask you, what do you think is on top of those 4 posts? Anybody?
4 evangelists?
The 4 evangelists! I thought to myself, when was the last time that I went to, particularly a Roman Catholic shrine, that emphasized the Bible? And it struck me that as the Bible is so much, again, the source of hope and inspiration in that country, I thought, how many people are coming to Bible study here? And that it is also for us the source of inspiration. This connects us so that we really are one tradition, and that is our holy book. And it is. I think a couple of last things I want to say, and then I'm going to stop. One is, I found that on this pilgrimage, I've been to a number of other places in the world, but I found on this pilgrimage, I had this very clear experience that when I went to the places of those massacres, when I was at the crypt, and in a couple other places, nothing separated me from that event. I was in the full power of that event. I thought, this is why people make pilgrimage through the ages. Why do you walk 2,000-3,000 miles to a place? Why do you go to the top of Mount Sinai? Why do you go to a concentration camp? You fill in the blank. Why do you go there? You can read about it, you can watch it on television. Why do you go there? And I found it's because being there, nothing separates you from what happened. You're with that person. You're with that event. Very powerful. Can't remember. I guess I can't remember what the other one was.
Amen.
But all but really, as I said in the very beginning, the primary reason I went on this pilgrimage was to understand better so that we here are better prepared to serve our neighbors who are from these countries. And the Cathedral has just recently made an additional commitment to Erica, has made an additional commitment to build, and has made a new and rather large commitment to Esperanza Center. So these are opportunities for our involvement, and I've said many times to you, there is leadership in this cathedral that is rare. And some of you will feel like, I just want to give 2 hours a week and just do something doesn't take too much. But some of you may actually feel a calling that you want to be in a more creative leadership position of helping that we be one community in Baltimore. I think that that's plenty. You can get a longer and a little more detailed thing from this handout.